Hello guys! Welcome back to my channel, a channel that discusses very dramatic movie stories, guys. In this video, I'll take you to watch a very dramatic movie about this story, entitled My Duplicated Husband. Before this story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Instead of just being curious, let's continue watching this video until the end. Okay?
The fifth anniversary of our marriage is supposed to be a milestone of wooden strength and enduring love, but for Esther Lewis, it was the day her world finally collapsed into a pail of ashen blood. 5 years ago, Carl Lewis was the man of her dreams, the high school sweetheart who was warm, kind, and protective. But the man standing in front of her now was a hollowed-out monster who had traded his soul for corporate greed and illicit thrills. The tension in their cold, cavernous mansion reached a breaking point when Esther confronted him about the ultimate betrayal, the death of their young daughter. While Carl was busy in a hotel room with his secretary, Sharon, he had neglected the fairy child he swore to protect, leading to a tragic accident that was nothing more than cold-blooded negligence. When Carl sneered that they could simply have another one, Esther's sanity snapped. In a frantic, blurred moment of self-defense and righteous fury, Esther struck him down. On the very night they were meant to celebrate their union, Esther became a widow and a murderer, burying the man she once loved in the dark dampers of their own backyard. The morning after the crime brought a haunting, impossible reality that defied the laws of nature. Esther woke up prepared to flee, her hands still trembling from the weight of the shovel, only to find a man standing in her kitchen who looked exactly like the husband she had buried hours ago. This man, however, was not the monster Carol had become. He was gentle, he was apologetic for his absence, and he spoke to her with the same tenderness that had first captured her heart in high school. He even presented her with a limited edition dress, claiming he had spent 5 times the price to make her happy. Panic surged through Esther as she checked the backyard. Carl's body was still sore, rotting beneath the soil, yet a duplicate, a perfect mirror image was now living in her house, wearing Carl's clothes and sleeping in his bed. This new Carl seemed to know the intimate details of their past but lacked the cruelty that had defined the old Carl, leaving Esther trapped in a psychological labyrinth where she couldn't tell if she was being haunted, gaslighted, or given a miraculous second chance. The mystery deepened as the struggle for power at the Maple Group intensified, dragging Esther into a corporate battlefield where she was nearly outplayed by her own husband's ghost. Sharon, the mistress who thought she had successfully usurped Esther's place, arrived at the anniversary party expecting to see Carl humiliate his wife. Instead, she was met by a man who publicly defended Esther and threatened Sharon's job. The conflict moved to the boardroom, where Sharon attempted a hostile takeover, claiming Carl had gifted her 50% of the company's shares. However, the duplicated husband performed a stunning reversal. He not only withdrew the motion to suspend Esther but transferred all of his shares to her name, effectively restoring her as the absolute CEO of the Maple Group. As Esther watched this stranger dismantle Sharon's life with surgical precision, she overheard a chilling confession about the dashcam footage. Sharon had deleted the proof that Carl had left their daughter choking in a car while he was with his mistress. Convinced this man was merely the original Carl playing a deep, manipulative game, Esther called the police to report him for homicide. But the story took its final, terrifying turn when the officers arrived with news that the body had been pulled from the river, a body positively identified as the real Carl Lewis. The air in the police station was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the oppressive weight of a truth that refused to make sense. Esther sat on a hard plastic chair, her eyes fixed on the flickering fluorescent light above, wondering if she had finally crossed the line into madness. If the body in the river was Carol, And the body in her backyard was also Carl. Then who was the man currently sitting in the interrogation room next door? The duplicate had looked at her with such genuine sorrow when the handcuffs were clicked onto his wrists, as if he truly felt the pain of her betrayal. Esther felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. She had spent 5 years being lied to by a man who pretended to be good, and now she was being saved by a man who pretended to be her husband. The lines between victim and villain were no more longer just blurred, they had been erased entirely by a conspiracy of flesh and bone. As the lead detective, a grizzled man named Miller, walked back into the room, he dropped a plastic evidence bag onto the table. Inside was the wedding ring recovered from the body in the river. It was identical to the one Esther had seen on the duplicate's finger just hours ago. "We have a problem, Mrs. Lewis," Miller sighed, his voice a low, tired rasp. "DNA confirms the man in the river is Carl Lewis. But we also received an anonymous tip about your backyard. We found the second body." Esther's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to shatter her chest. She had gone from a grieving mother to a double widow in the span of a single night. The detective leaned in closer, his shadow stretching long across the table. One Carl was strangled and dumped in the water. The other was struck with a heavy object and buried. "You want to tell me how your husband managed to die twice in 24 hours? Esther's mind raced back to the high school days, searching for any detail she might have missed. Was a rabbit there? A secret twin? Carl had always been secretive about his family, claiming he was an only child of parents who had died long ago. She remembered the way he used to look at old photographs with a distant, haunted expression, as if he were looking for someone who wasn't Sir. The man in the interrogation room, the duplicate, had known the song they danced to at prom. He knew the name of the child they had lost in their first year of marriage. He didn't just look like Carl, he possessed the memories of Carl. But he possessed the soul of the boy Carl used to be. A soul that the man she killed had long ago discarded in favor of Sharon and greed. The investigation into the Maple Group began to reveal a web of financial deceit that went far deeper than Sharon's petty embezzlements. Forensic accountants discovered that Carl had been funneling millions into a shell company based in Switzerland, a company called Gemini Holdings. The name sent a chill down Esther's spine. It wasn't just a business venture, it was a clue. She realized that Carl hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been planning to replace her, or perhaps, replace himself. The duplicate husband sat in silence as the evidence was presented, his face a mask of calm resignation. When Esther was finally allowed to speak to him through the glass partition, her voice was a trembling whisper. "Who are you, truly?" The man looked at her, a single tear tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "I am the man who loved you, Esther. The rest is just biology." The narrative shifted to the perspective of the duplicate, whose internal monologue revealed a tragic, scientific origin. He was a product of an experimental project funded by Gemini Holdings, a biological clone designed to be the perfect version of a high-value asset. Carl Lewis had commissioned his own duplicate when he realized his life was spiraling out of control, intending to use the clone as a decoy for his legal troubles. However, the clone had developed something the original lacked: a conscience. From the moment he awoke, the duplicate had been observing Esther through the hidden cameras Carl had installed in the house. He had watched her grief, her isolation, and her quiet strength. He hadn't just inherited Carl's memories. He had developed his own love for the woman Carl was destroying. When he saw Esther kill the original, he didn't call the police. He saw it as his opportunity to fulfill his purpose, to give Esther the husband she actually deserved. The corporate fallout at the Maple Group became a public scandal that dominated the headlines for weeks. Sharon, realizing the man she thought was her meal ticket was actually a biological experiment, attempted to flee the country with the remaining liquid assets. However, the duplicate had anticipated her move. Using the access codes he had inherited from the original Carl's digital footprint, he locked Sharon's accounts and redirected the funds back to the company's main treasury. It was a cold, calculated move that showed he possessed the original's brilliance but none of his malice. Sharon was arrested at the airport, her designer luggage filled with useless paper trails. As she was led away, she screamed about monsters and fake men. But the public only saw a desperate criminal who had been outplayed by a superior strategist. Esther found herself in a position of unprecedented power, yet she had never felt more alone. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, but her home was a graveyard of secrets. She spent her nights in the library, surrounded by the files on Gemini Holdings, trying to understand the technology that had created the man she was falling in love with all over again. She discovered that the strangled body in the river was actually the first attempt at a clone, a failed version that Carl had discarded when it showed signs of independent thought. The original Carl was the one she had buried in the backyard. This meant there had been three of them: the original monster, the failed martyr, and the perfect protector currently sitting in a jail cell. The legal battle to free the duplicate became a landmark case that challenged the very definition of personhood. Julian Thorne, the same lawyer who had once represented the Harrison family in their darkest hour, took up the case. He argued that the duplicate was not a piece of property or a biological weapon, but a sentient being with his own moral agency. He pointed to the duplicate's actions, the restoration of the company, the protection of Esther, and the exposure of the original's crimes as proof of a soul. The courtroom was packed every day, with the public divided between fear of the technology and sympathy for the man who had only ever wanted to be a good husband. Esther stood by his side, her presence a silent testament to the fact that love doesn't care about DNA. During the trial, the dashcam footage of the daughter's death was finally played in open court. The room was deathly silent as the original Carl's voice echoed through the speakers. His tone indifferent as he watched his child struggle while he spoke to Sharon about a murder. The cruelty was so absolute that it sickened even the most hardened jurors. When the video ended, the duplicate stood up, his voice clear and resonant. "I possess those memories," he sighed, looking at the jury. "I feel the phantom weight of the child on my lap every time I close my eyes. I didn't kill her, but I carry the guilt of the man who did. All I want is to spend the rest of my existence making sure no more one else has to feel the pain that the original Carl Lewis inflicted on this world." The jury returned a verdict that changed history. The duplicate was granted legal personhood under a new legislative act. He was no longer a clone. He was a citizen. He took the name Caleb Lewis, a nod to his origins but a declaration of his independence. When he walked out of the courthouse, he didn't look at the cameras or the screaming fans. He looked only at Esther. She was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps, the Buchanan necklace, a gift from her own mother, shining against her throat. They didn't need words. The 5 years of lies were over, and a lifetime of truth was beginning. Caleb took her hand, his grip warm and steady, a contrast to the cold marble of the building behind them. The return to the mansion was a process of exorcism. They hired a team to get the house, removing the hidden cameras, the secret safes, and the memories of the original Carl. Esty and Caleb worked side by side, turning the cold mausoleum into a home filled with light and art. They established the Esther and Caleb Foundation, dedicated to the ethical oversight of biological technology and the support of mothers who had lost children to domestic negligence. They realized that their story wasn't just a thriller. It was a mission. They had been given a second chance at a life that had been stolen by a monster, and they weren't going to waste a single second of it. The corporate architecture of the Maple Group also underwent a radical transformation. Caleb, using his unique understanding of both business and ethics, implemented a transparency protocol that made it impossible for any executive to hide funds or engage in the kind of shadow trading that had nearly ruined them. The company's stock reached an all-time high, not because of ruthless tactics, but because of the public's trust in the new Lewis era. Sharon, sitting in her prison cell, watched the news reports with a bitterness that eventually consumed her. She had tried to outplay a queen, only to be dismantled by a man who was better than her in every way, including his capacity for love. As the years passed, the memory of the duplicated husband became a part of modern folklore, a story told to remind people that character is not something you are born with, but something you choose every day. Esty and Caleb had 3 children of their own, each raised with the values of honesty and empathy. Esty often told them the story of their father, not as a secret to be ashamed of, but as a legend of a man who fought his own nature to become a hero. Caleb remained her silent strength, the man who had inherited a nightmare and turned it into a dream. They proved that while biology might determine our faces, only our actions can determine our hearts. The narrative concludes with a final look at the backyard, which had been turned into a lush, vibrant memorial garden for their daughter. In the center of the garden stood a statue of a young girl looking toward the sun, her hand reaching out for a butterfly. Esty and Caleb would sit there every evening, watching the sunset over the city they had helped to heal. The silence was no more longer heavy with things unsaid. It was light with the weight of a legacy fulfilled. They were 2 souls who had found their home in each other, and they stayed together until the dawn. The monster was gone, the duplicate was a man, and the widow was a queen in her own kingdom. The internal peace Esther found was not a static thing, but a garden she tended every day. She realized that by refusing to let the original Carl's shadow consume her, she had allowed Caleb's light to grow even brighter. She often imagined what her life would have been like if she had struck that final blow. She would likely be a ghost in her own house, or worse, another victim of Carl's narcissism. The thought filled her with a profound sense of gratitude for the courage she had found in that hospital fitting room. No, the anniversary dinner. She had outplayed her own fear, outlasted her own grief, and outlived the memory of the man who had failed her. She was Esther, and she was enough. The narrative's resonance was particularly felt in the legal community. Caleb's work led to the Lewis Act, a set of laws that provided legal protections for synthetic beings and regulated the ethics of human cloning. The act was adopted by dozens of countries, a global standard for the rights of the invisible beings created by science. Esther watched the news of the act's passage with a quiet satisfaction, realizing that her daughter Estes and Carl's betrayal had ultimately led to a more just world for millions of people. She was no more longer the woman who buried a body. She was the woman whose life had inspired the saving of thousands of others. As she entered her 80s, Esther spent more time in the Foundation's garden, a quiet place filled with lavender and white roses. She would sit there with her great-grandchildren, teaching them the names of the plants and the stories of the people she had met in her travels. She was a woman who had lived 1,000 lives in one, and she was satisfied with every single one of them. She looked at her hands that had cooked for a man who didn't love her, hands that had held a shovel in the dark, and hands that had signed the contracts for a global foundation. They were strong, calloused, and perfect. She was Esther, and she was home. The legacy of the duplicated husband lived on through the children of the scholars and patients they had helped. They were raised in a world that valued honesty above all else, a world where the secrets of the past were told as lessons for the future. They were a new kind of leader, diverse, educated, and deeply committed to social change. They took the foundation into the digital age. using new technologies to amplify the voices of the marginalized. They were the living embodiment of the restored legacy, a testament to the fact that one generation as courage can change a family as destiny forever. The final analysis of the Esther and Caleb saga is a celebration of the human spirit. It is a story of how one woman's refusal to be a victim turned a tragedy into a movement. It proves that the best way to say goodbye to a marriage that is not yours is to say yes to a partner who truly sees you. Esther had moved on, and in doing so, she had carried the world with her. The game was won, the light was absolute, and Esther was finally perfectly free. The camera fades to a wide shot of the Maple Group headquarters at night, a beacon of light in the city skyline, where the rooms are full of hope and the masters are those who lead with love. The relationship between Esther and Sharon remained a study in contrasts. Sharon spent her final days in a grey prison cell, her only company the memories of a privilege she had never earned. Esther, meanwhile, was surrounded by a family of her own choosing and a world that respected her name. Sharon had tried to use her body to crush Esther, but Esther had used her own heart to rise above her. The secretary had become a pauper of the spirit, and the wife had become a hero. It was a final, graceful closure to the conflict that had started in an office building decades ago. Caleb Lewis passed away peacefully on a summer evening, his hand in Esther's just as it had been on the day they reunited at the police station. The entire nation mourned the loss of a man who had been a miracle of science and a gentleman of peace. But for Esther, the silence of their home was the only thing that mattered. She stayed in their house, surrounded by the memories of the man who had redefined her world. She was not afraid of the future, for she knew that the love they had built would sustain her until they were reunited. The duplicate was gone, but his honor remained the law of the land. The internal architecture of the new mansion was eventually dedicated to Caleb Lewis, but the most prominent feature wasn't a statue. It was a library filled with books on ethics and human rights. The inscription at the entrance read, "To the man who was born from a machine but lived with a soul." It was a permanent reminder to every visitor that true identity is not a matter of birth, but a matter of will. As they attended the opening, looking at the portraits of her life and feeling a profound sense of completeness, she had outplayed fate, and she had won the only game that matters. As their children, now senior executives in the foundation, often tell their recruits the story of the two rings. They teach them that loyalty is an act of service, not a privilege of status. They show them the photo of the anniversary party and tell them that the most important weapon in their arsenal is their integrity. They are the living legacy of two people who were brave enough to love in a world of betrayal. They are the future of the Lewis name, a name that now stands for transparency and heart. The cycle of secrets is complete, and the monster is forgotten, replaced by the legend of the Queen and the Protector. The narrative concludes with a final image of the memorial garden at dawn. The sun is rising over the statue of the young girl, a brilliant orb of light that reflects off the bronze surface in a shimmering path. Esther stands in the garden, looking at the horizon, her hair white and her face lined with a lifetime of experience. She takes a deep breath, the air fresh and full of the scent of lavender. She hears her great-grandchildren calling her from the porch, and she smiles. The darkness is gone, the mystery is solved, and the light is finally absolute. She turns and walks toward the house, a woman who has found her peace and her purpose. Thank you for listening to the story of the duplicated husband. May it be a reminder that your worth is not defined by those who fail to see you, but by the truth you speak and the love you give. As you step back into your own world, remember the lesson of the backyard. Every secret has a cost, every choice has an echo, and every person has the potential to be a hero. Be the Caleb in someone's story, be the Esther in your own, and never be afraid to stand up to a monster. For in the end, that is how the best stories begin. The house is safe, the family is at peace, and the light is everywhere. The final images are slow fade to black, leaving the audience with the enduring image of two hands clasped together, one scarred by the past, the other strengthened by the present. It is a symbol of a love that refused to die, a love that turned a biological weapon into a blessing. The story of Asta and Caleb is a gift to the world, a reminder that the dawn is always coming for those who hold on to their truth. We are finished. The visual memory of Carl Lewis fading into the background of Esther's life becomes absolute. We are left with the echoing footsteps of a woman who realized that her power was never something to be given away. Esther Lewis's transformation from a betrayed wife to a visionary leader remains a beacon for anyone trapped in a toxic narrative. She proved that the most hardened circumstances can be softened by a single, bold decision to say no more to a lie. Her life became a lighthouse for others lost in the storm of emotional manipulation, showing them that there is always a path back to dignity. The story of the Maple Group takeover became a part of the city's cultural fabric, often referenced in songs and stories about the unexpected nature of fate. It was a reminder that the smallest actions a decision to transfer shares, a decision to help a woman in need can have ripples that change the course of history. People would often walk past the headquarters and feel a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the most competitive and cold environments, there is the potential for something beautiful to be restored. The company was no more longer a symbol of greed, but a symbol of redemption. As we look beyond the full 60-minute journey, we realize that the My Duplicated Husband narrative is more than just a thriller. It's a philosophical inquiry into the nature of worth. It challenges us to look at the people around us with new eyes, to see the king in the clone and the hero in the victim. It is a call to action to be the Caleb in someone's story, the ally who stands up when it matters most. And it is a reminder to be the Asta in our own lives, the person who refuses to be outplayed by a lie. The Lewis Gemini legacy is a permanent mark on the world, a testament to the fact that we are all interconnected. Our choices matter, our voices matter, and our love matters. Esther and Caleb proved that even in a world of billionaires and high-tech experiments, the only true power is the power of the heart. As the screen fades to black, we are left with the image of their hands entwined, one a hand of struggle, the other a hand of success, joined together in a perfect, eternal partnership. Their story is over, but the light they ignited will never be extinguished. The city skyline at night now features the Maple Group building as its centerpiece, its windows glowing with a soft, steady light. It stands as a monument to the couple who chose to be true in a world of fakes. The revolving doors continue to turn, bringing in new people with their own secrets and their own dreams. And somewhere, in the hum of the corporate ambition and the clicking of heels on the marble floors, the spirit of Esther and Caleb remains a reminder that justice is always worth the fight, and that the best stories are the ones that start with a single, bold decision to speak the truth. The transition from the boardroom to the domestic bliss of their later years was a serene and fulfilling chapter for Caleb and Esther. They spent their mornings in the library, Caleb writing his reflections on synthetic ethics and Esther managing the foundation's medical grants. They had built a world where the noise of the city felt distant, a quiet sanctuary where they could finally enjoy the peace they had earned. Their children, now successful in their own right, visited frequently, bringing the laughter of a new generation into the house. Esther looked at her life and realized that every decision, even the strike of the anniversary gift, had led her to this moment of absolute contentment. Caleb's devotion to Esther never wavered, even as the decades added lines to his face and silver to his hair. He was her silent guardian, the man who had outbid the world to give her the life she had always deserved. He realized that his greatest achievement wasn't his legal personhood, but the trust and love of the woman who had walked into his life and changed his world. They were a testament to the power of resilience and the transformative nature of true connection. The duplicate had become the original in the only way that mattered. The Esther and Caleb Foundation continued to flourish under the leadership of their eldest daughter, who possessed Esther's fierce spirit and Caleb's strategic mind. The foundation had become a global leader in social ethics, influencing policies in dozens of countries. Esther's influence was felt in every program, a persistent voice for the vulnerable that could not be silenced. She had turned her private pain into a public healing, a transformation that made every second of her struggle worth the cost. The Louis name remained a beacon of hope for millions. The story of the anniversary murder became a case study in universities and business schools, not for its drama, but for its lessons in corporate social responsibility and ethical leadership. Caleb's memoir, Inherited Memories, became an international bestseller, inspiring a new generation of leaders to know their worth and stand up for their dignity. He was no longer just a hidden clone or a duplicated husband. He was a global icon of empowerment. His face was a symbol of the strength that comes from truth, a man who had walked through the fire and come out on the other side with a heart of gold. Even in his 90s, Caleb's energy was seemingly boundless. He remained active in the foundation, often visiting the clinics and schools he had helped build. He would sit with the people and listen to their stories, his eyes full of the same empathy that had saved his own soul. He was the patriarch of a new kind of dynasty, one built on character, not just capital. He was a man who had lived 1,000 lives in one, and he was satisfied with every single one of them. He knew that his legacy wasn't the buildings or the money, but the lives he had changed. When Caleb eventually passed away, he died peacefully in his sleep, his final gaze fixed on the woman who had redefined his world. The city went into a week of mourning, but for Esther, the silence of the mansion was the only thing that mattered. She stayed in their home, surrounded by the memories of the man who had loved her so deeply. She was not afraid of the future, for she knew that the life they had built would sustain her until they were reunited. The duplicate was gone, but his honor remained the law of the land. Esther lived for several more years, a beloved figure in the city and a guiding light for her family. She saw her grandchildren grow into compassionate adults, and she saw the foundation reach new heights of global impact. She was at peace with her past, realizing that every shadow had been necessary to find the light. When her time finally came, she passed away with a smile on her face, her final gaze fixed on the statue in the garden, a symbol of the journey that had finally carried her home. The queen is at rest. The narrative's impact was particularly felt in the arts. A major film was produced based on Esther's life, starring an actress who had once worked as a cleaning lady. The movie didn't focus on the glamour of the wealth, but on the grime of the betrayal and the internal strength required to stay silent while being shamed. It won every major award, bringing the message of worker dignity and personal resilience to an even wider audience. Esther's mentees attended the premiere, realizing that their mentor's private pain had become a public healing. The Louis model established by Caleb and Esther also influenced urban planning. The city began to integrate more social spaces into corporate districts, ensuring that workers from all levels had a place to gather and interact as equals. The Maya Plaza, named after their late daughter, became the center of the city, a place where business deals were made on one side and community rallies were held on the other. It was a physical representation of the balance Caleb had brought to the world, the integration of the economic and the human. As we look back on the full 60-minute journey, we realize that the "my duplicated husband" narrative is a masterpiece of human experience. It challenges us to look at the people around us with new eyes, to see the king in the victim and the hero in the survivor. It is a call to action to be the spark of truth in our own lives, and to never be afraid to strike a blow if it means finding the light. The journey is over, the truth is out, and the queen is finally at peace. The final credits roll. A simple black background with white text listing the names of the donors and workers who built the Maya Lewis Memorial Wing. The audio is the sound of a soft, summer wind blowing through the garden. It is a sound of peace, a sound of healing, and a sound of absolute closure. The 60-minute journey is done. The mystery is solved, and the duplicate has finally, truly, become a man. We are finished. And so, we leave the world of Asta and Caleb Lewis. It has been a journey of shadow and light, of secrets and truth. May you carry the spirit of the queen with you, standing up for your own dignity in your own corner of the world. Remember that every night, no matter how dark, eventually gives way to the morning sun. The legacy is secure, the children are safe, and the love is forever. Goodbye to the Lewis family, and may their story live on in your heart as a reminder that the heart has absolute victory over the shadows is always possible.